We have Osai Ojigho, country representative for Amnesty International, joining us remotely, and Austin Aigbe, senior program officer at the Center for Democracy and Development. Thank you, both gentlemen and lady, for being on the program tonight. It's now the federal government's word, let me just put it like that, against that of, before we get to talk about TSOs and security, against that of the panel, which some have picked holes, so when you could pick holes in them. What next now? Let me start with you, Austin. Let me start with you, Austin. It's now the federal government's word against that of the panel, which some, like Owonikoko, has picked holes. And I mean the Judicial Panel of Inquiry that submitted its report recently. You heard what the federal government said through the Minister of Information, that it's standing against what the panel is saying. So is the word against that of the panel. What next? What's your sense of what the government has come out with now it has spoken?
I think it's important to interrogate what matters. What matters is that when the panel released its report, the report was from evidence-based analysis. It was that the panel spoke to individuals who were physically present at the toll gate. And of course, if the federal government wanted to attack or contradict that report, you would expect that the federal government would also have conducted its own analysis by way of evidence, because we believe in evidence-based analysis. So when the panel comes up to say we spoke to 20 people, 30 people who were physically present, and when the panel used the narrative of the narrative they used, and the federal government think that they think otherwise, the onus is on the federal government to tell us, who did you speak to? Who were those you were engaged with? Are you going to be relying on video evidence that were not actually real or something? I think it's important not to just peddle statement that may easily be contradicted. I think the federal government is already contradicting itself, because at the time the minister had said nothing happened, and if you can actually call it a bloodless massacre, a bloodless massacre. But we have come to realize from the report, from the panel report, that it wasn't just a bloodless. There was some blood. I don't know how many blood it may be, but then there was some blood.
All right, let me take it to Osai Ojigho, country rep of the Amnesty International. Thank you so much for joining us. Well, would you say that Lai Mohammed raised some fundamental questions? Number one, where are the parents or families of those who allegedly killed at the Lekki toll gate? And Lai Mohammed also said that the panel threw away evidence or testimony of ballistic experts, that came before the panel. What do you make of that? I mean, shouldn't government be cut some slack? That seems to be what Lai Mohammed is saying.
I think the first thing is to establish that this panel was set up by government, and so there were terms of reference that they had to comply with. But more importantly, it took a year for them to conduct this panel of inquiry and present their findings. So it's quite unfortunate that rather than looking at what the panel has done, the minister is already casting aspersions to what has been presented. It's also important to stress that we shouldn't be surprised by what the minister has said. This is the narrative that has been peddled since the incident happened on the 20th of October 2020. And I believe the conversation is to fit into that narrative. If people have died and it's an established fact, that is what you should be interrogating first of all, to begin to ask where the families is, to move away from the critical issues. Were bodies recovered? Were bodies identified? Were names put to those people? And who are these people? Does it also mean that if there are bodies discovered and they are not readily identified, they are not people? I think we need to be careful not to fall into that trap of constantly moving the bar each time evidence is presented. And that's what the minister is doing. Secondly, the issue about the methods that the panel has used in order to reach their conclusions are open for everyone to see. We are eagerly expecting the government of Lagos State to present this report publicly, to make it accessible, and the commitment they've made regarding the white paper and the implementation they want to do, to put it out there so that people can decide for themselves. They can read the reports for themselves and decide for themselves what happened. But the truth is, and that I think is part of the function the panel was supposed to achieve, to establish the truth. Something happened. People placed orders. Who are those people? People died. People were injured. People are living with life-threatening injuries, long-term disability as a result of the violent repression of these protests. What is the authorities going to do about that? They're not going to disappear. It happened. And that should be where the conversation should be, the solution that we all need in order to move forward. And we can't move forward without justice and accountability.
Okay. All right, solution we all need to move forward. Osai Ojigho, we're going to ask you to hold on, and Austin Aigbe will be back in a short while, and we'll continue with the discussion.
All right, thanks for staying with us on Newsnight. Our guest, Osai Ojigho, is the country rep of Amnesty International, joining us remotely. And Austin Aigbe, Senior Program Officer of the Center for Democracy, Development and Democracy. Thank you both for staying with us. Now, should there be a fresh investigation? Because Alhaji Lai Mohammed did point to that government will maintain its stance that there was no massacre whatsoever unless a fresh investigation proves otherwise. And note also that U.S. Secretary of State Anthony Blinken recently in his interview with international media said that the panel report brought transparency to what happened on October 20, 2020. Austin, should there be a fresh investigation? Because it looks like this panel report is more or less dead on arrival as far as government is concerned.
No, it's not dead on arrival. I think what Honorable Minister has said is to run away from the evidence. I think it's about time government just show up openly and said, whatever may have happened, we're sorry. In fact, I always talk to my students that even when you are right and the other person feels is right, just say, I'm sorry, and move on. I don't know why we have to set up another inquiry. If the Honorable Minister and the federal government wish to do that, who will be the members? Are you going to bring the members from somewhere? Or you want to have like a civil society? I know they won't do that. I wish you want to say, let's have a civil society, government, judiciary, sit and interrogate that report. And I'm sure if that happens, there's almost a likelihood that it will result in almost the same thing. Because, you know, when you do scientific research, for those of us who went to school, you have what they call scientific, that there are evidence. When you quote names, when you quote addresses, if you say you talk to individuals, like what the panel did was to literally become like a court of law where people appeared with their counsel and they presented those cases evidentially. And I'm curious, if the minister said nothing of blood happened, and he wants to, I mean, that's exactly what I think Osai already said. We're expecting the government of Lagos State to then look at, to come up with what they call a white paper. I don't know what the white it is. Maybe what we have now is the red paper because there's so much blood in the paper. Maybe what we need now is a white one to try to clean up that red. It's no problem. Just say, we're sorry. Whatever has happened.
That's administration. That's the way it works. You have to get, after the inquiry, you have to get a white paper. Let's move on to some other discussions. I was going to talk about the fact that is it fair for the NSAS coalition to be asking that everything the panel presented should be, implemented hook, line, and sinker when the white paper has not come out. All right, but Osai, I listened to the first PRO speak there. We had Ozekome senior advocate of Nigeria here at a time, and they put up something about people who were done injustice to. And their first thought was to be, I don't know whether to use the word cantankerous, belligerent against the government. But on second thought, they said, no, we must not fight all the time, fight government all the time. We can take another route and dialogue. What Mba seems to be saying is that the civil society organizations don't seem to have the interest of government at heart, is always wanting to do government in. What do you say to that?
I think the bone of contention has always been about our roles and clarity about our functions. Government needs to see civil society as providing alternative views, information, and also acting as watchdog, as the case may be. One of the other mistake that happens is that use an umbrella term for all civil society organizations. We are also not a homogeneous group. Some are community-based organizations, NGOs, and the way we do our work is different. Some of us, like Amnesty International, we're an advocacy campaigning group. Others offer humanitarian assistance, so they are more service delivery oriented. And so a lack of understanding about the roles of civil society in governance, our different functions, has led to this misconception about what we do. And oftentimes, this has led to this stalemate, so to speak. We must be consultative in the work that we do, but non-governmental organizations by the name are independent of government. So government should not have groups that say and speak like government. Our independence means that we have our resources separate and we will carry out our mandate based on our own rules, of course, within the law. This other thing is a lot of state officials expect NGOs and other civil society organizations to bend to the will of government, regardless of whether they are doing the right thing or not. So that blind acceptance or endorsement of what government does should not be the case. That said, there's always room for dialogue and for exchange. And that exchange can only happen if we are open to look at what the other person is bringing on the table, the solutions and recommendations. Oftentimes, civil society organizations provide recommendations and say, look, these are ways we think you can incorporate and do better in the work. But because the reaction is to respond to the issues that have been presented and they consider quite critical, they tend not to listen, in my view, to the recommendations and the solutions that are being put forward. We recognize fully that government has the power in order to implement all these policies. And that's why we use advocacy and campaigns to remind them of that responsibility and their obligations. And especially when we work with marginalized groups who don't have access to this policy making.
All right, very quickly, Austin, let's bring this to you. I mean, CSOs, not enemies of security agencies, but critical and even strategic partners. How do you strike a balance between the role of the CSOs and, of course, security agencies in a way that they will both not, compromise each other and water down their very, very critical role?
So the CSOs are not government. So we need to put that in perspective. So and they are never going to be at the same par because, like Osai said, there are different mechanisms, different registration platform, different kind of funding. But it's important to put it straight up. For security architecture, you need civil society organizations. You need civil society. Let me remove the word organizations. Who are the civil society? Every one of us who have nothing to do with government, you belong to the civil society. When we say, see something, say something. That's about policing. That's about elsewhere, outside of this country. When someone comes to your neighborhood you don't know, the first flag is to quickly call attention to the security. That's where we promote that mutual collaboration. Like the DSS, PRS said, even though the Commissioner of Police, CP Frank Uba, also said it, that the CSO and the police and the DSS work collaboratively. In any case, you could define civil society as a way that may suit you per se. But when I often ask, when you say civil society did XYZ, I ask the question, can you mention names? Can you give us names? Because when you give us names, I'm able to interrogate with those names and tell you, no, those are not civil society organizations. Few months ago, there was a report of about 300, in quote, pro-government civil society organization. Those who call on, of course, not necessarily press or something, they have press conferences and they turn out press statements. And when you're going to report them, you say leaders of civil society organization. I've had cause to interrogate some of those who make statements in Anambra election. And sincerely, no member of the civil society organizations in Anambra State knew them by face belong to this sector. But they come out in quote with that umbrella because it's a very big and large environment. For example, the Nigerian Union of Journalists is a civil society organization. The NAWAD is a civil society organization. So it's not about CDD, it's not about Amnesty International. When you form an organization, whether it's membership or like Osai said, community-based, the Osusu Association, they are members of civil society organization, and it's important to put that in proper perspective.
All right, thank you very
Austin
much.
Aigbe, Senior Program Officer, CDD. And of course, Osai Ojigho, Country Representative, Amnesty International. Well, thank you both for being on News 9.